Hey everybody, Valence here, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what this video is. It is actually my first attempt at making some sort of detailed skill guide for any video game, to be a matter of fact. So as many of you guys know who've watched my previous videos covering Diablo 3, I am playing as Barbarian, and I was having a tough time being a little squishy as far as the Barbarian went. So I went through, did a ton of research, a ton of experimentation, and finally came up with this build. And I'd like to share it with you guys. Now, I know this may not be the only viable build. There's tens of millions of builds in Diablo 3 for each individual character. You can go on and on and on. However, this is a build that worked for me, and I wanted to share it with you guys. I'm going to call it the Vampire build, because the whole build's premise is to eat life away from the enemies as you kill them, to heal yourself so you can take massive amounts of damage. So, I hope you guys enjoy this video, and remember to give it a thumbs up if you think it's awesome, or a like, or a share, or whatever, and share it with some of your Diablo 3 friends. You know, anything you can do would be appreciated. Thumbs up. So, without further ado, let's actually hop into Diablo 3. First, I'm going to give you a recap of the build. We're going to talk about the build and some of its functionality, and then I'm actually going to go into some combat scenarios to showcase the build and why I enjoy it so much. So, let's get started, everybody. I'll talk to you in a second.
Hey everybody, it's Avialence, and now we're actually going to talk about my skill set build that I've been trying to discuss with you guys here. So, as many of you guys know, if you've been watching my previous Diablo videos, I had tons of problems staying alive as my Barbarian. It actually made me go and create an alt. I actually have a level 15 Demon Hunter and a level 16 Mage now, or excuse me, a Wizard, that I've played with just to try to get some different combat expertise. But I really liked my Barbarian, and I really liked his storyline and everything, and I was already so far in the game with nearly 20 hours of playtime that I wanted to fix him because I knew he wasn't broken, and I knew that this was just something that I was lacking to understand. So today I spent the entire day, as well as most of last night, actually researching the Barbarian and trying to learn a little bit more about him and how he functions. The big thing was I have never played Diablo games before, so this is a big leap for me, and I'm trying to understand and tailor to the game. Now, I went through and I found out a few things, and I actually made a build that I'm going to call the Vampire build, so to speak. Now, what this build focuses on is the idea of leeching life while performing combat maneuvers. The more you kill, the more you're going to stay alive, and that's the build that I tried to perfect here. Now, I do have gameplay of the build to showcase that it does work. This is also, I'm going to show a few combat scenarios in the beginning of Act 3 where I was overwhelmed, and then I'm also going to show a boss fight that we'll talk about when the clip airs. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the skills. So I pulled up my menu here to show you guys, and I'm not really spec'd for anything particular. I'm still trying to work how to understand this, the stats, how the stats work, what I want to do. You see that my strength and vitality are the two highest. That's the big thing. Also, my armor is pretty high, and we'll talk about a way to buff that armor even higher. But most of my gear here is just pretty straightforward, nothing too fancy. Each piece has at least some strength or vitality, and my two swords are rares. One does 54 and one does 57, and they each have red gems socketed in them for extra damage. Now, there's really nothing else to say about my character as far as armor goes, but I do want to walk through every single one of my skills. So in Diablo 3 you can equip a total of 6 skills and 3 passive skills. Now I am level 30 now, so that is why I'm able to unlock all of these, and this build is very viable as long as you have some of these skills unlocked. Now given in the first act of the game, it's not really going to matter. Survival is not going to be a big thing. You'll notice that with some of my other gameplay videos. It wasn't too big of a deal. Towards the end of Act 2 it started to become a problem, and then in the third act I entered right away and I knew something was wrong and I wasn't doing something right. So I went through, did my research, and made a build I'm going to call the Vampire build. As I said, this build focuses on wrenching health from your enemies while staying in combat and buffing your armor. Now I have a few kind of tools here that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to walk through all the skills and why I chose them, and hopefully give you an idea of how to help keep your Barbarian stay alive in some of those longer, hardcore action fights. So let's go ahead and start with your mouse skills. Now the primary, you guys know in my other video, I actually went with Cleave. Now Cleave was great, and I actually used Reaping Swing as a Fury boost. However, I did swap to Frenzy. Now why did I swap to Frenzy? Frenzy is an ability that with each hit buffs your attack speed. Eventually it'll get pretty fast and you can start cleaving through things. Now this stacks up to 5 times. However, with the Glimpse of Triumph, which is unlocked in the late 20s, killing an enemy with this ability will actually heal you. Now if you use Frenzy as your main attack, Triumph is a necessity. This helps you stay alive, and it's better than Cleave or Bash. However, I will say this is probably the one of two skills that I'm going to talk about that you can replace with Cleave or Bash depending on your armor or your skill with the Barbarian. So Frenzy with the Triumph Glyph is very nice because it heals you. Now for my secondary, I have Rend. I consider Rend to be a necessity as well. What Rend does is spends a certain amount of rage points, about 20 fury, so to speak, as it says here, to wound enemies around you and make them bleed for 3 seconds. Now this isn't a very wide AoE arc. I was having problems getting these enemies to bleed. Now why do I want them to bleed? Why do I want a ton of enemies to bleed? Because of the Bloodlust Glyph. Now when this skill rune is put in with Rend, this skill rune lets you gain health points when you damage enemies with Rend. Now this is essential for this build. A lot of people talk about the idea of a barbarian and how he should not have enemies around him. Many people will say you can't have enemies around you, you don't want to be surrounded, and that is very true. However, this build not only counters that, but actually uses that in order to heal itself. Now, I like this idea, and given I've only played through on normal mode, I'm not sure how it's going to play on the harder difficulties. But for a normal mode build, this is interesting. And if any of you guys are past me and want to try out this build with the harder difficulties, let me know. Anyway, though, let's get back to the skill runes here. So Bloodlust, Rend, very important. And I'll talk about that in the idea of how I manage all of these abilities to heal myself. Because if you have Rend on 1 or 2 enemies, it's not going to heal you as much as you want it to. However, I came up with a counter for that. This counter is going to be my 2 defensive abilities. We'll talk about Leap first. So Leap makes you simply jump in the air at the targeted area. You can also, I use it as a skill set too, where I can jump up and down different levels of a dungeon. It's very nice for getting around. And I also went ahead and put a rune in called Iron Impact. This increases my armor for a limited time after landing. If I'm constantly leaping in and out of packs of enemies, this will keep my armor up almost the entire time. I believe there's only a 2 or 3 second delay between the armor buff and the time Leap cools down. You're able to use this a lot. Now, when you go into a group of enemies, you're going to leap in. This buffs your armor so you can take a few hits, and that leads into the second defensive ability, which we'll talk about here in a second. Now, as I said earlier, many people say, hey, you really, really don't want to be surrounded. Leap is your way out. If you're surrounded and you obviously can't handle the mobs that are attacking you, you leap to another group, and then you do the same method with them to pull them to you. Now, we're going to talk about the pulling to you in a second. But Leap is your main utility in-out ability. It is your I am going to die ability, and it is your immediately charge in ability. Very handy, and I always have it on. Now, this will lead to the next ability, which is key to make Rend work. As I said, Rend has a problem because you can't get enough enemies in the cone without the rune that extends the range of it. However, you need to have the healing rune to make this build viable. So, this is where defensive comes in. Ground Stomp. Now, Ground Stomp I wasn't a big fan of until I actually came up with this build. With this build, Ground Stomp is almost a necessity. Why? Because when you put the Wrenching Smash rune into the Ground Stomp, not only does Ground Stomp stun enemies, but it increases the area of effect of Ground Stomp by a few feet, I believe, and also pulls these enemies directly on top of you. Now, if you guys are already seeing what I'm about to start explaining, that's awesome because you get the idea I'm going for. Yes, you're going to leap in, you're going to Ground Stomp all the enemies near you, and you're going to rend the hell out of them. Now, you're going to be getting hit enough that you will generate Fury. Now, this Fury is going to be spent to rend up the enemies. Not only are you damaging them around you, but you are also healing yourself, and that is what makes this build so important. Now, given this only works when you have massive amounts of enemies around you, I found out as long as I had at least 3 or 4 enemies around me that were rended, I was fine. I could always counter the damage. On some of the boss fights, however, this is a bit of an issue, and I actually have a video where I'll demonstrate how I survived the boss fights. So, Ground Stomp, very important. In the end, you're going to leap in to get your armor bonus, then you're going to Ground Stomp to pull everything near you, and you're going to rend those up to heal you. It's a great way to do it, and it sounds a little crazy, but I encourage you guys to try it because this is my build. I love this build. So now we'll move on to the third ability, Tactics. Now, I wasn't too big of a fan of all these shouts and battle rages and war cries. However, I equipped Warcry for one reason. First of all, it costs 30 Fury. It has a 30-second cooldown, and it increases your armor for you and your party, which is very important, for 60 seconds. This armor increase is actually extremely significant. This will help you by buffing your armor up to a certain level. And because you can't equip the passive skill, Nerves of Steel, with this build, this is essential. Now, why is this essential? Warcry plus the Leap ability will buff up your armor to a point where you can take a ton of damage and heal yourself through it. It's kind of like making a soft bubble around you to absorb some of the damage with your armor, and then that'll counteract all the damage you're taking, and your heals will be able to keep you up. Now, Warcry not only buffs your armor, but later on, actually, with Invigorate, increases your maximum life and your regenerative life ability while Warcry is active. Given this isn't available till 41, but it's yet another healing utility that will help make you invincible as a barbarian. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the armor bonus before we go back into the skills. So pull up my inventory here, and I'll go ahead and use Warcry. You see my armor is 802. This buffs up to 962, plus that of all my party members. Now, this lasts 2 minutes because of another rune I have in place, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So, my next rune is a defensive cooldown. This is the one cooldown I feel that you can kind of alternate in and out depending on what you're doing. Now, with this one, it is Ignore Pain. Ignore Pain uses your rage pool to protect you from damage for a limited time. Now, this is very nice. However, as I said, when you have Ground Stomp and Leap as your in-out utility abilities, how do you get away from enemies? Ignore Pain with the Bravado glyph is the thing that helps you. This knocks back nearby enemies when using Ignore Pain. If you're overwhelmed and you've rended up a ton of people and it's still not healing you, pop that Ignore Pain. Not only will it protect you from damage for about 15 seconds, but it'll knock back everything you just pulled into you, so you have some time to recover, get those Rends ticks up, and get your health back up before you pull them all back into you. Very key. I love this thing. You'll never see me using it too often, but it is a lifesaver. Now, there's other things you can swap in for this, of course, but I feel that Ignore Pain is a big part of your defensive. Now, there's a glyph here, level 31, that increases their duration, which would be fantastic. And there's also this one. Now, this glyph is called, and by glyph I mean rune. I'm still talking WoW, I apologize. This rune is called Ignorance is Bliss. Now, this means that when Ignore Pain is active, you gain life for damage dealt to enemies. This, I think I would swap out at level 36. Again, it's another healing utility that is so important for this build. You're trying to counteract all the damage you're taking by healing yourself, and all of these abilities help. So I may change that up, and I'll be sure to let you guys know how that works. Now, those are my main abilities. Let's go ahead and talk about passive. So at level 30, you can equip 3 passive skills. Now, I have 3 specific ones that you'll unlock by level 30 that have helped me and helped me make this build kind of unique. The first is Pound of Flesh. Now, Pound of Flesh is one that you're going to unlock right off the bat. Pound of Flesh increases the chance of finding a health globe by 25% and gives you 100% additional life from health globes. This will roughly end up being around 125 to 150% health from globes, plus an extra 25 bonus for enemies to drop them. This is a necessity. Health globes are going to be a big part of you, and especially since you're pulling everyone into you, you want them to drop health globes so you don't have to worry about managing your health so much. You will take a ton of damage with this build, and it is important to counter that with more and more and more healing. Second, Bloodthirst. Now, this doesn't seem like anything really significant. All it does is give you 3% of all damage done as life. Now, this is a little crazy. In the boss fights, this is going to be a lifesaver because every damage piece you deal will give you 3% of your life, and with Frenzy, because Frenzy hits so fast once it's up to 5 stacks, you will be able to negate AoE damage effects. I have an example video later in this clip, and we'll talk about that then. But this will help you negate effects. Not only does this apply to, your typical abilities like Frenzy, Ground Stomp, Leap, it also applies to Rend. This is an extra 3% on every Rend tick for health, which stacks up big time. So Bloodthirst is a necessity. Now, this is the one you could switch out. However, I do enjoy this because it's another 1% of my maximum life per second. Inspiring Presence is my third passive skill slot. Now, this doubles the duration of my shouts, which is why my Warcry is up to 2 minutes instead of 1 minute. And after I use that shout, I get 1% of my life per second for 60 seconds. This means that you will gain 60% of your health pool over 60 seconds. Awesome ability. It's another heal tick that doesn't sound like much, but when you stack it with some of these others, it makes a big, big, big difference. So guys, that is my build. I've worked on this a lot, and I'm able to ignore a lot of damage and have a much better time with my Barbarian. It'll get nichey at times. You'll get down to about 25% health, and that's when you just ignore pain, push him back with a knockback, and watch those Rend ticks kick right back up to bring up your health. If you guys have any questions about this build, please feel free to post a comment below. I'll be happy to answer. And if you guys have any suggestions for this build, keep in mind I'm new to Diablo 3, so this is just me talking about a build that I hope many of you guys will consider and use. Diablo 3 has hundreds of thousands of millions of bazillions of builds, and this is just one of those that I went through and worked with. So tell me what you guys think, and if you like it and enjoy it, please feel free to share this video. It'd help me out. Now though that we've walked through here and I've told you about my build and we've got my little plug-in, my little advertisement in, let's go ahead and actually look into the build. I'll show you some gameplay footage of me using the build so you'll be able to get a hang of how everything's working. Anyway guys, let's get started with that. I'll talk to you in a minute. So now we're actually looking into the gameplay, and you'll see with this build that it relies on having tons of enemies around you, and you'll notice that my health globe really doesn't drop below about 75% in most of these normal fights without boss mobs. Now, by boss mobs, I mean mobs with special abilities or anything like that. While my health does remain pretty stagnant with those fights, it is, you know, still going to take a more deteriorated thing compared to normal enemies. But you'll notice that I have taken one of the Barbarian's weaknesses, which is being surrounded, and learned to thrive off of it. And by thrive, I mean the vampire-esque kind of statistic. Healing myself via all these different things that buff me with health. They'll constantly be healing me so long as I'm doing damage, and it's absolutely fantastic. Now, this build, as I said, you know, and I've said so many times in this video, strives off of being surrounded. As long as you have Rend up on at least 2 or 3 targets, so long as you're not too overwhelmed, you're going to be fine. And that's this whole idea of a vampire-esque build. You'll see in this clip, I am surrounded, yet my health globe does not drop because I have Rend on so many enemies, and my Warcry ticking, and my passive 3%. Plus, I'm killing everyone with Frenzy and getting that health bonus. It's so easy to handle big mobs, especially by yourself. Although, remember that you're not invincible, and that's one of the key things. Keep in mind, though, this is on normal difficulties, so things may change on the higher difficulties. If you'd like to try this build on the higher difficulties and let me know about it, please do. I'm interested to hear from you guys. But, as I said, I'm still playing through on normal, and I'm not able to kind of test this on some of the higher difficulties. So, feel free to leave a comment below if you think of that. Now, in this final fight here, I'm fighting a boss. You see he's already half dead when I started recording. He's the Lord of Gluttony, and he's the first boss in Act 3. Now, he emits this AoE radiation cloud that kills you pretty quickly. Now, with this healing, plus a few potions, I'm actually able to negate this effect. Now, Frenzy, because I can't kill him, it's not healing me, but I have Rends on him, plus my Warcry heal, plus my 3% critical heal, passive skill, and I'm just able to plow straight through this guy with 4 to 5 stacks of the cloud on me at all times. So you can see it works with the gameplay. And now let's go ahead, sit down, and talk about functionality and some other things about this build.
So as you can see, the build's very interesting. I kind of took all the weaknesses of the Barbarian and tried to perk them or negate them in one way or another. The one thing I found with this build is it's very useful in massive packs of mobs, so long as you watch it. Remember, you're not a god. You can't tank all these mobs. As long as you're absorbing health by damaging them and getting that health back, you'll be fine. But remember to use Leap as a functionality to get out of there. Also the Ignore Pain with the Knockback rune to get out of there if you get surrounded. Because those ticks will start healing you up, and as long as you have Rend ticks up and you're killing people with Frenzy, you should be fine. But if you ever need that little kind of step away to make sure that the healing goes up and you catch up on your health life, that's fine. Health life, wow. Um, but that's fine. That's why you have Leap. Leap is get in, get out. It's an in and an out tool, offensive and defensive. So that's about it, guys. That concludes my first build video. Now this is the Vampire Barbarian build, rather, not, well, I guess it's a video. Yeah, it's a video. But build. And I really just kind of wanted to share this with the internet out there because I've been doing tons of Diablo 3 gameplay footage and my loyal fans are checking it out and everything. But I also wanted to try to solve one of the Barbarian's biggest problems. Now, again, disclaimer, I have not tried this on the higher difficulties. I do not know if this changes anything. I still don't know how to manage stats, guys. That's a big thing. I understand I need strength, and I understand I need vitality, but I'm not sure which is better, which does what. You know, I'm still trying to figure Diablo 3 out. So this is a beginning kind of build guide. But I hope it's maybe giving you an idea of something to try on your Barbarian personally. And remember, please thumbs up this video, like it. If you enjoyed this, please like it. It helps me out a ton. Also, share this video. If you have some forum posts you hang out on, or talk about games and something, feel free to share this video. I would appreciate it. Any feedback or anything I can get is great. I'm hoping that this video may start a discussion. And by discussion, I mean civilized discussion, not a rant fest. But a civilized discussion talking about some Diablo 3 builds on YouTube, because while I enjoy the Diablo forums, I enjoy Blizzard's forum setup, I also like to have some discussion on my turf, you know? So, please, tell me what you think of the build. Tell me if you liked it, or if you played on a higher difficulty than I have, and you said, oh, it doesn't work here, it doesn't work there, or I tweaked this, or I tweaked that. I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say. So, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this build. If you have any concerns, questions, anything on this build, or want me to try out something else, please feel free to post a comment in the links below, in the chat boxes, links, things, the internet stuffs below, and let me know. I'm really interested to hear some of your feedback on it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this build video. Instead of doing my typical thing, I kind of took a day or two, and I put together this video from various clips and functionality changes and stuff, and I'm hoping that this build will make a lot of people out there happy, just as it made me happy, making my squishy Barbarian kind of a god. So, thanks. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate everyone and the feedback you give me and all the views that you guys give me. I couldn't do it without you guys. I'm here for you guys, you know. It's the whole reason I do these videos is to try to be part of a community, and I'm hoping that I can become part of the Diablo community in the coming future. So, anyway, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for build videos, gameplay videos, or anything like that. And please feel free to have a discussion with me in the comments below. I always reply, and I'm happy to hear what you guys have to say about my builds, my functionality, my videos, and everything like that. Take it easy, everyone. Have a great weekend, and I'll be talking to you in the next video. Avialence out.